One of the other things that I'd love to hear your take on is just our reporting integration and the effort that we've made to bring our forecasting into the rest of Fathom.
Yeah, the reporting, like Fathom reporting, is just such a wonderful product in its own right as well. And the exciting thing about building a forecasting product is that we're generating a lot of brand new data. And what better way to use all that data than to leverage our sort of best-in-class reporting platform. It already has a lot of the tooling that we would want to use to analyze different scenarios or to report on what you're forecasting. So for us, it was very natural to say, we're going to let reporting do what reporting does best, and we're going to let the forecasting section of Fathom be all it could be. And we're going to tie them together very, very closely so that you don't have sort of two different reports going out every month. You can have one big reporting pack that you're sending out instead to your business owner, if you're a CFO, if you're an advisor, to be able to have that sort of, again, that source of truth document for that month, and to have all your forecast data coming in was a really important goal. So part of that, obviously, like you said, with the new componentry we've had to build, we've got to make sure that we're able to build the picture of what the forecast needs to tell that business owner. So a lot of what we had to focus on was, okay, well, how? Like, what do you need to say about this forecast? So
how do you break down the information that's in there?
So much density
to
that data. Yeah. So how do we put that into a report in a way that someone can understand? And how do we use some of our current components? How do we sort of retrofit those with new data? And how do we build brand new components as well to bring in and build that clear story? So the business roadmap was a really important new visual that was featured in the reporting, in the forecasting product itself. Bringing that into reporting was a critical piece, I think. The ability to also include a micro forecast, just as simple as a table, just saying exactly what it looks like to hire this employee with all of the impact self-contained, adding that into a report, I think adds immense sort of accounting integrity and value to what you're trying to communicate about the forecast.
Because the micro forecast doesn't just capture the direct movements, does it? It's got tax implications. There's income tax that you pay on the profit for an employee, for example, that sort of flows in, and then there's the payment cycles of that income tax. It's all contained in that one.
It's the full
one micro forecast.
The full picture, yeah, and including that in a report. After saying, these are the things we're going to do, these are the people we're going to hire, these are the marketing campaigns we're going to undertake, to be able to actually show exactly what that looks like is a really powerful tool. Bringing scenarios in as well, so you could have a roadmap that shows you, your main forecast, you could have a roadmap that shows you a different scenario, and you could have the difference between the two. It's also quite important to explain how you arrived at the forecast numbers as well. That's a step that we knew was important to almost everybody building a forecast. If you're building a forecast for a business owner, you might need to tell them how you arrived at certain figures.
It's a transparency point we talked about before.
Exactly, yeah, but without needing to go into every single number and figure out exactly how it was calculated. It's like, how do I communicate the gist of how I've done all this and the different things that have come together here? Especially if you're angling for funding or for a loan from a bank, you're going to need an even higher level of documentation for that sort of process. And to make sure that customers didn't have to, jump into Excel and model that out separately, that they were able to be supported through that process, just with all the Fathom tooling was an important step. And a big part of that as well is something as simple as explaining what your drivers are for your forecast. So if you have built a driver-based model, to include a table that shows all your drivers for the next financial year was a simple piece, but
important,
so powerful.
To explain what's happening, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So the reporting piece, I think, is one of the most exciting parts because it does utilize everything that people already love about Fathom reporting, and it just sort of brings a whole new lens of data to the story that they can tell. It makes it a little bit more meaningful when they're talking about the future. We've always had a few capabilities to run projections and things like that based on your budget, but now we've sort of beefed everything up with forecast data, which is definitely letting you tell a completely different story rather than, the past, the performance. You're able to say, these are the various paths we can take in the future, and this is what they're going to look like.
Now, I have to ask you this question because I know you're passionate about this concept of being able to outline your assumptions that you've made while you're generating your forecast. And I know, we really wanted to make as much as what we do automatable as possible. And I remember through various stages in the process, particularly with a certain demographic of our users, being able to sort of have a part of the report that explains the assumptions of the forecast was a massively important part, and you fought for that pretty hard.
Yeah, I did.
On behalf of those users that you'd interviewed.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it's never going to be someone's favorite feature, but if you don't have it, it's just going to kill it for some people. And for anyone who is trying to have a forecast audited, or for anyone who's trying to get funding, it's just really important to explain what you've done and why you've done it. And generating, because we've allowed such an extreme amount of flexibility in what you can model in Fathom, it kind of
makes it hard.
Scared us. Yeah, I think it scared you.
Yeah, it scared me very much.
Scared all of us.
If you can make it super flexible, how do you try and explain that?
If you haven't put limitations on the process, then how do you explain this intricate web of what a customer is allowed to do in one page,
product? And that was the inspiration you had with working with the design and product teams around being able to capture notes as you're adding a rule or adding a timing profile. Even if you type a single number, because you can type a single number straight into the grid, you might have had just a standout month, and you don't want to change your smart prediction rule or your last year's actuals rule, but you just want to enter this one number, and something's coming up. But to be able to add your own notes to that, which automatically flow then through into your assumptions reports if you tick the box. That was a great way of solving the problem.
It's a simple solution as well when you think about it, because we talked about a lot of quite complex engineering solutions to this problem, and many hours spent talking about how this could be solved.
Because we wanted it to be approachable and distilled down to
and we didn't want it to have a lot of effort involved as well. But just realizing that it might not be something we can automate in a true sense. It might be something where someone needs to say something personal rather than something that we could predict.
The human touch.
The human touch, yeah.
We can tell them what the rule was. We can tell them that what was in place, but
we
to
can't tell you why.
The why, that is a human role.
Probably the most important part of it as well. It's the most value that they can add is the why. And it's just something that we don't know. You've sort of put in your own experience with that business, and you have an understanding that we don't, because we can't possibly.
So you capture the why as you're building your forecast. As you add that rule, say why. And if you want to, it'll flow through to your assumptions.
Only if you want to. And that's important too. Like it could just be a note to self.
Yeah, that's right.
It could,
To do, review this
do,
number.
Yeah. Doesn't seem quite right. Yeah. And you might not want your business owner or your customer seeing that. You might want that to be a little bit more personal. It's just for me to remember something later on when I come back in 6 months. When I was deep in this first forecast building session and I made a lot of notes, if I didn't make those notes and I had to come back, I'd be wondering, why on earth did I do it this way? Why, what piece of information did I have 6 months ago that made me do it this way instead of this other way? What was I thinking? Yeah. And having the notes is important, because you can sort of go back and see, okay, so this is what I was thinking. I did leave a breadcrumb trail for myself. And then to have the option to turn that into, this is something I want to communicate to somebody else. It's not just for me. That's a really simple thing, but I think it's going to be a really popular way of managing your forecast and sort of self-communicating a message to you in the future.
One of my other favourite tools, reporting components, is the one where we're able to take a single balance sheet account and fully spell out all of the movements from the forecast, just looking at just the one account. And you might be interested in cash, and say, well, what happened? And you can see all the movements from the various P&L accounts that have sort of affected that, different journals you've created in the forecast, payments to tax, other things, all spelt out in one table showing you the opening cash position, all the movements that happened in that period, and the closing position. And it doesn't sound like something super exciting, but for people who want transparency, and if you want to make the balance sheet a first-class citizen, you've got to spell that out and help people understand where all the different movements came from that generated that figure. So that's one of my other little secret components I really like in our reporting offering now.
It's one of those ones that sounds really, it is one of those things where when we were building it, we were like, this this is great because it does show you something that you couldn't have got from any other spot in the product so far. So we knew that it was a useful view for someone who needed to dig down, but just the amount of trust that has generated from everyone who's seen it, they've sort of been like, oh wow, like everything's happening for me.
One of our beta testers said, I think this is wrong, and then they look at that chart and they actually no, your forecast is right. Like,
yeah, and
my spreadsheet's wrong.
My impression of what's about to happen in my business was wrong. Yeah, and that moment I think is the most important one we're trying to capture is that, like, being able to show somebody something about their business that they wouldn't have discovered through a normal sort of method. So if they're maintaining a giant spreadsheet, for instance, and you know, if even a few of their little calculations for tax payments or something are incorrect or not sort of up to date, that can have a huge sway in their forecast, and they might get to the next month and not have enough cash to pay their tax bill, you know. So being able to find those issues early and highlight those cash shortfalls, I think that's another area where Quick Metrics comes back and shines again.
Absolutely, yeah.
To highlight those areas where you might have a few different tax payments coming out all at once, and that's really why you've got like such a big gap in your cash all of a sudden. But a lot of the time, that's really hard to visualize for people. It's hard for them to see coming up ahead. But if we can highlight those areas, hopefully, we'll help a few business owners avoid some snags. I
just want to reflect on this one moment in our development journey where we realized, you've got your actuals that come in from the accounting system. So we call that internally the actuals. It's your accounting system source data. So what's actually happened in reality, and then your forecast spinning forward from there. And we realized, well, to do an accurate forecast, we have to sort of make an adjustment in between our actuals and our forecast to reflect that maybe our actuals are a bit wrong. Maybe our opening tax isn't what it says in the accounting system because the end of year financials haven't been done yet. And there was this moment where we said, well, let's create this sort of gap between forecasting and actuals. And we were like, but if the actuals don't represent the truth, why don't we change the actuals? And so this whole concept of putting adjustments in, so allowing you to adjust your accounting system data to get it to make the adjustments that make it more accurate so that your forecast spins right, but also spells out your actuals data, but also explains through reporting components these sets of adjustments that have been made so the user can understand them and why they've been made, and
they can understand the gap.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we actually said, well, let's close the gap. Let's make what Fathom reports an adjusted set of actuals. If you really have a different tax position, say it in your financials results as well as in your forecast, and make the two from an accounting perspective completely integrate. So you've got absolute flow, P&L to balance sheet, all the way through from your actuals, your financial accounting data right through into your forecast. So it makes perfect sense from an accounting perspective. So having that one system, one source of truth, being able to audit back to say, here's what's in the accounting system, here's the adjustments that have been made in Fathom, whether it's a manual adjustment made by the user or whether it's an automatic adjustment we've made to compensate for tax because the user's asked us to, they've selected that option. Being able to spell that out and get one source of truth on not just your actuals, but your forecast into a report that's got complete accounting integrity. That was an exciting, junction of what we were doing with reporting and forecasting. And of course, in the reporting, there's the really obvious ones that we wanted to do well as well. So I was really excited when I saw, the simple graph of last year's actuals, this year's projected results with actuals and forecasts combined, next year's forecast and the year after's forecast. And being able to see that holistic big picture view of the business really excited me. Particularly, it was a simple component, but being able to include that in your report and say, well, here's my trajectory. That's where I was last year, but you can see the next 2-3 years out ahead and see where it's heading at a very, very high level as well.
It's very Fathom to go as far as we've gone with it. But at the same time, I think what a lot of people will be expecting is just the three-way forecast in a report, which we've got, but it's just so great how much extra we felt we could add to that experience as well. So having all that new componentry to really explain the forecast, explain where parts of it come from, to explain the assumptions, like we said before, to have the business roadmap, to be able to map out those different scenarios. That's really going to give a lot of flexibility to how we report on forecasts. And it's a great foundation to have built to go forward with, because anything you build in the forecasting side of the product now, you do have a little footprint in reporting for each of those things as well, which is very exciting, I think, and probably going to exceed some expectations.
We hope so. We hope so.